Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be continuing our Back to Basics series. We're going to be going back to inventory and we're going to talk about packages and containers. I thought that would be a good sort of way to go, do a little bit of inventory, then some warehouse, and then come back and talk about this idea of packages and containers because it really kind of enhances the way that you can do things in the warehouse. So it was good to get some of that basic warehouse stuff out of the way. Now let's look at a little bit more advanced warehousing and inventory stuff. So let's start by just looking at some of the principles behind what a package or a container item is. The one thing that I want to emphasize is that we're not really going to be talking about packages like virtual packages today. So things like a wireless mic package or a screen package, something that you drag and drop on a quote that will automatically add a bunch of other items. That's more of a virtual package. We're not going to talk about that today. We're talking more about physical package or kit container type items. I know a lot of people call them different things. I've heard them called kits. I've heard them called packages, containers. I typically like to call them containers. So that's what I'll use throughout the course of this webinar. So when I talk about containers, what I'm talking about is something like this, like a shipping case, something that other items physically go inside of. And the really cool thing about Flex is that we allow you to create individual inventory items for these items, and then you can actually scan items into these cases, and they're represented inside of Flex that way. So the way that these cases are built in the real world, you can actually build them and have them represented that way within Flex. Now the benefit of this is that once you have scanned other items into a case, then it makes it a lot faster when you're prepping so that you don't have to open those cases and scan the things that are inside. Because the whole idea behind this is that you've pre-built those cases, then you put them on the shelf, and then all you have to do is just scan a single barcode of a case that has items inside of it, and Flex will automatically scan the items that are inside of it. So let's just start looking at a few examples, and then we will look at how that works when you're actually scanning things out and back in as they go in and out from jobs. Let's start with a really basic scenario. This might be something like a Mackie 450 speaker case. So I'm going to double click that to open. And if you're just building one of these items from scratch, let's just first go over and look at the Edit Inventory Item screen. So the same screen that you get as you're building a new inventory item. A couple things that I'd like to mention here. Number one, you still want to give this a name and possibly even a short name, because depending on how you set up some items in your Flex system, this might appear on a quote. And so if you want your customer to be able to see what that item is, then you might want to give it a good name so that they know exactly what that is. I also like to mention the group that you put these case items in. I've seen some people do it the way that I have set up here, where I just have an entire group that's dedicated to any type of shipping case. This could be audio, video, lighting cases. This could just be generic A cases that you just put anything in. This is how I like to do it, but I've also seen people set up case folders within each inventory group. So for example, I might come over here and under video, and I might actually have something. I don't, but I might come into my video group, right click and say I want to create a new child group that is just specifically video cases. And then maybe give it one of our generic case icons. And now I have a group just for video cases found in the video inventory group. Honestly, there's really no way, there's no wrong or right way to do this. It's just whatever makes more sense to you. Like I said, I personally like just doing one group of all the shipping cases, but you could certainly do a child group underneath each parent group if you want. But I'm just going to delete that because I don't need both. Now the other important thing is the preset. We'll come back and talk about a few of these in just a second, but you're typically going to be choosing something like serialized storage or serialized package, and then we'll talk about what a free pick container is later on as well. I also recommend paying close attention to the logistics info here, especially the weight, because once you scan this item, and sure, it's going to scan the items that are inside of it, like whatever speakers are inside of it, but it's also going to put this case onto the manifest as well. So you might want to put the actual weight of the case onto this inventory model record so that when it gets scanned to a manifest, the manifest knows that it's on there and will consider that weight in the total weight of the manifest. And remember, in the last couple of weeks we talked about some of those manifest reports, like the one that shows the total weight of every item scanned. So I always like to recommend put the weight of just the case in the item here, and then we might also put the weight of our Mackie 450 speakers into that individual inventory item, so that when we scan this case out, it puts the case and the speakers on there with their own individual weights, so that your report that you print from the manifest that shows weights will be accurate. So this particular item I'm calling serialized storage. You'll notice that the default boxes down here are going to show track by serial number is yes, which means that each one of these cases is going to have its own individual barcode. Model container is no, because we're not necessarily putting anything in here that we want to automatically add to the quote. Unit container is yes, though. That means that this item is a container unit that I want to be able to scan other items into. So I want unit container to be yes, because each one of these serialized units I want to be able to open up as a container that I can scan things into. And then this is a big one too, the contents available, yes or no. I like to keep contents available set to yes for most of my container items. And the reason being is that as soon as I scan some Mackie 450s into one of these cases, if this were set to no, then Flex is going to take those items out of availability. So you want to ask yourself, if I'm putting Mackie 450s on a quote, and if that quote is confirmed, so it's now creating conflicts and taking availability, do you want that quote to be taking availability and also this container to be taking availability? At that point, you're going to get a double conflict. So a lot of times I like to keep my containers as contents available, yes, so that once I scan something inside of it, Flex isn't going to consider that item as not available. We'll show an example of that in a minute, but that's just kind of a background of how that works. Contents permanent is going to be something we'll look at a little bit later as well. That just means that when I scan this container out, automatically Flex is going to scan anything that's inside of it. But when I scan the container back in, if contents permanent is no, it's not going to automatically scan the items inside of it. But if contents permanent is yes, then it will scan the items that are inside of it. That's just for the inbound scan. So again, we'll look at these real-life examples when we get a little bit further in this webinar with scanning things in and out. But that's just a little bit of background of what these different boxes do. So like I said, 90% of the time, maybe even more, I like to set my items up as serialized storage. So what that does for me is, remember, I set it up as track by serial number, yes. So I have individual serial units for each case that I own. So I own 5 cases, 5 separate barcodes. And when I open one of those barcodes, and I can either do that by going to the serial numbers tab and double clicking, or a lot of people don't know this, if I'm just on the calendar screen, I can either scan or type in that barcode, and it takes me straight to the content builder mode for that case. And what the content builder mode is just a place, this is just a place where I can start scanning items into this case. And you might be asking, well, what is this list all about? Why is it showing me Mackie 450 speaker, 0 out of 2, an IEC cable? That actually comes from the parent inventory model information. So if I go back to the parent Mackie 450 speaker case, notice that there's this what we call storage requirements tab. And I just drag and drop the things that are supposed to be inside of this case. So I just dragged and dropped Mackie 450 and say that I need 2 of those, and then same with the IEC cable. So all this is doing is just giving me a list of what's supposed to be inside that case. This isn't me actually building a container. This isn't taking anything out of availability. This is just me saying, when I open one of these barcodes, these are the things that I want listed as things that are supposed to be in there. It's just kind of a nice fail-safe for anybody who opens this case to start building it. They'll have a list right in front of them so that they know exactly what they're supposed to build. So once we open this case and we're in content builder mode, all I have to do is just start scanning barcodes, and that will start putting those items into the container. I could either use my barcode scanner, but since I don't have one sitting in front of me, I'm just going to type in barcodes. So I typed in barcode 00057 and 58. Those are both Mackie 450 speakers, and it put them inside of this case. Notice what happens if we actually open those individual speakers. So if I type in barcode 00057, this is what it's telling me. Its location general is my Salt Lake City warehouse, but its container location is 450 speaker case barcode 311, because that's the one I just scanned it into. So Flex will kind of keep track of where you scanned things and tell you what container they're in. You can also see that information like on the inventory manager screen. If I were to search all my units, including serial results, then it will show me any item that's in a container. So it looks like I have a few Mackie 450s. That's pretty much it that I have in containers right now. Let's go back to our barcode 311 speaker case. We also want to scan in some IEC cable. These are non-serialized, so what I'm going to do is just double click that. Flex is asking me, do you just want to execute a virtual scan? I'm going to type in how many, and that scanned the right amount of IEC cables. This turns green up here because that's telling me everything that was on this list that's supposed to be scanned got scanned in, so that means it's green, good to go. Also notice that none of these scanned in is permanent, because remember from the parent model of speaker case when we were setting up that preset, I said contents permanent as no, so it doesn't check that permanent box when I scan items in. And again, all this does, when I scan 311 out, all these items will automatically scan, and Flex will do that every time. But because these aren't marked as permanent, when I scan this case barcode in, it's not going to automatically scan these items because I still want to open the case and verify that they're there and scan them individually. Let's do this again with another case. So let's maybe open barcode 000310, and it looks like this one's already built. It looks like I've scanned it out to a job too, so let's maybe not use that. Let's use, I bet 309 is available. And then let's just scan a couple of speakers in there. Again, if you have a barcode scanner, this is a lot easier because you just put the actual speakers in the case, then scan the barcodes on the speakers when you're on this screen, and it builds for you. Virtually scan a couple IEC cables. So now I have case barcode 311 and 309 that are both built with things inside them, and they're ready to be scanned out to a job. And again, that's the whole principle behind this idea of pre-building containers, is that I could put those cases on my shelf, just let them sit in the warehouse for weeks or even months, and then when they're ready to go out on a job, all I have to do is just scan that barcode. So let's go create just a test quote, and we'll kind of look at how we can get this process going. One thing to keep in mind is what is the item that you want to put on a quote. For me personally, I don't want to put Mackie 450 speaker case on a quote necessarily. I want to put the actual item that the customer knows that they're going to be getting, which is just the Mackie 450. I just want to double check really quick how this is set up because I don't want to jump ahead yet. I just want to set that up as a serialized model, just normal serialized model, and when I drag and drop that on a quote, I'm just sending out 2. It will pop up suggestions. I'm not going to add any right now. In fact, let's say that we need 4 because I want to scan out both. So look at what happens when I go through the process and confirm this quote and then go create a pull sheet. You're going to notice that the pull sheet is not going to show the case or any of the other items that go out with these Mackie 450s. And that's fine, maybe that doesn't bother you, but look what happens when I go to prep this job and I scan out a case. It pops up this little box that says this item's not on the list, and in this particular case it's saying this item's going to create a shortage, which means it looks like I either don't have enough on hand, there might be another job that's using these. So that's what it's telling me right there if I try to scan something that's not on the list. I can get those cases to show up on the list though. Really all it takes is we just go back to our quote. Let's delete this item. We'll delete it from the pull sheet as well. And maybe every time I put a Mackie 450 on a quote, it also automatically adds the case, just so that I don't have to deal with that prompt coming up on the pull sheet. So let's go to the item that we're actually putting on the quote initially. And I can set this up as serialized model with accessories. What this means is that whenever I put this item on a quote, I just want it to automatically add things with it, accessories. And that's going to be in the contents tab of this inventory model. Keep in mind the contents is different here on the inventory model page than it is on the inventory unit. When I go and open barcode 311, the contents tab is actually what is inside of this case. When we just have the parent inventory model open like we do here, contents just means the accessories. What are the things that I want to automatically add to a quote when I put the 450 speaker on a quote? And in this scenario, I want it to automatically add the case, but I don't want it to add 1-for-1 ratio because 2 speakers go in the case. So I'm going to say for every 1 speaker, I want to add 0.5 cases. So if I put 2 speakers on a quote, it's only going to add 1 case. If I put 4 speakers on a quote, it's going to add 2 cases. So you can do that in Flex. You can add fractional quantities like that to make it work. And I also want it to automatically add an IEC cable for each speaker, so 1-for-1. Watch what happens now when I add these 450s to a quote. Let's say I need the 4 like I put in initially. And again, I'm going to ignore the suggestions. But what it does is it says, well, here's your 4 Mackie 450 speakers. And then as child items, the accessories, you're getting the case and the IEC cable. Those are automatically line muted. Unless that setting has been changed in your system, those will automatically line mute so that when you print a PDF, the customer doesn't see it. But when you go to create a pull sheet, those items will carry over to the pull sheet. And look at the difference now. When I go to prep this, and I type in that same barcode 311, it just scans it out for me. It doesn't have to pop up that prompt that says this item's not on the list because it is on the list. So it scanned out 1 case, it scanned out 2 IEC cables because we scanned those into the case, and it scanned out 2 Mackie 450 speakers. Look at what the manifest looks like. It shows us the parent case, and then it shows us the things that were inside of that case. So if we scan out barcode 00309, it scans the other case, the other two speakers that were inside that case, the other two IEC cables, and now I'm 100% complete and I can finalize. And again, look at what the manifest looks like. It's showing as the parent the cases and then the things that were inside of each of those cases. And this is where I could print my container reports, where it will show each container that was scanned onto a manifest and what was inside of that container, so that I could put those onto the outside of each container. Barcode 311 and its contents, barcode 309 and its contents. So that's the process of scanning out these cases and containers. Let's look at what happens when you want to scan that back in. So the job comes back, I go to my manifest and I want to scan the manifest in. Let's go to the return screen for this manifest. And look at what happens when I scan barcode 311. All it does is scan the case itself. I still have to open up each case and scan the individual items each individually. And that's because when you send out multiple cases like this, for those of you who have actually worked in a warehouse and know how this goes, you can almost guarantee that those same speakers aren't going to come back in the same case. So we don't want them to automatically scan back in. We want to open the case and visually check each one and scan in the speakers individually. So let's say that this barcode 311 came back with 00057 and 00060. That'll check back both those individual speakers. And then the other case, 00309, maybe came back with speaker 58 and speaker 59. So we're still scanning everything back individually, even though they came back in different cases. And then I could scan in my IEC cables as well. And then finalize. Now what I like to do at this point, because since we scan those items back in, they're now removed from the case. If I open up 311 again, nothing scanned into this case, because Flex assumed since I scanned this in and I scanned in the items inside of the case, Flex is just assuming that, well, you don't have those items in the case anymore. So I just need to rebuild this case with whatever's inside of it now. And a lot of people will complain and say, well, why do I have to scan everything in and then rebuild the case? And it's really not that difficult of a process, because if you have the case open and you're scanning everything in already, then really all you have to do is just scan the case, return the things that are inside of it, and then go to your calendar screen, scan the barcode that's on the case. It opens up to your content builder mode. Scan whatever's inside of it. And again, all this goes a lot faster if you have barcodes in easy to scan locations and a barcode scanner, and you could just quickly rebuild that container and then close it up and put it on the shelf ready to scan out to the next job. So the whole idea of having to scan a case and then scan the individual items back in and then rebuild it goes really fast if you just set up a good workflow like that. So a lot of times if I scanned out like 10 of these cases, I would just open up each case, first scan every case, then scan everything inside of it, verify it all returned, and then just close all my tabs, go to my calendar, scan the case, and if you don't have that case open already, it will automatically go to content builder mode. Just scan the case, scan the items that are inside of it, and then a nice little trick, you can scan that case again, and it closes. So if you don't have anything open except for your calendar, you can do that really quick. Scan the case, scan the items inside to build it, scan the case again, and it closes it. Scan the next case and continue the process. So realistically, you could do this whole process without even having to walk back to your computer. If you have a cheat sheet with non-serialized barcodes, you could just scan that. And then again, scan the case again and it closes for you. So that was just a really basic example of how that works. I have a couple other examples like a Shure ULXD case. So if we open up one of the serial units for this case, you can see that what we need inside of it is a handheld wireless mic, a body pack, the dual channel receiver, some clip-on mics. And this is a good example of something where you might put a permanent item. My rule of thumb is to say if items don't really come out of that case, like if they're bolted in or rack mounted, that might be a good one that you could mark as permanent. Right now it's not going to let me because this isn't an actual item, that's just the model telling me that I need to add one of those. But if I do add one and put in an actual barcode into this case, I can say, well, this is permanent because I don't take this in and out. The microphones and the body packs come in and out, so I don't want to make those permanent, but this, unless something is wrong with it, I usually don't take that out. It's just rack mounted in there. And what happens with items like this, and let's just build this really quick, and I'm going to use virtual scanning. Like I said, I usually don't recommend doing virtual scanning, but for time's sake, I do it in trainings. And then I'm not going to bother with these clip-ons, but if I go to scan that out, and let's just go back to that pull sheet we were on earlier. I can unfinalize it and scan something else out to it. It's going to work exactly the same when I scan the barcode out. Of course, it's saying it's not on the list. It's going to create a shortage, but I can bypass that. So there's my mic case with everything inside of it. But look what happens when I go to scan this one in. I still have a bunch of items in there that aren't permanent that I still have to open up the case and manually check. But when I scan that case in, oops, it's need to unfinalize it first. That was my problem. But when I scan that case in, it scans the case and the permanent item automatically. So that's the one thing that is different about marking an item as permanent, is that it will automatically scan in with the case. But then I still have to come in and scan each of the non-permanent items individually and then rebuild this case. You'll notice that that was, remember, an option. Let's go back to our inventory. That's an option from the parent inventory. Contents permanent, yes. If I mark that as yes, then automatically everything that I scan into the case will get that check mark of permanent. So that's just what happens by default when I scan items in. A lot of people ask me, what's the difference between like a serialized storage and a serialized package? According to Flex, it's contents available, yes or no. So if I set something up as a serialized package, then scan items into that container, then they're no longer going to be considered available in my Flex system because they've been scanned into a container. That's the big difference. So things like the speaker cases, screen cases, cases where things are coming in and out frequently, serialized storage. But maybe a serialized package where things are in there and not coming out, and you're not necessarily putting the things inside of it individually onto a quote, maybe like an amp rack or video rack, that might be a good candidate for serialized package. I have a couple webinars that deal specifically with storage and package if you want to look up those, but this was just more of an introduction to each of those. If you look up those webinars on our YouTube page, then you'll be able to find a little bit more information and some more details about each one individually. If you have any questions or want some more tips about containers and packages, you can always go to our forum. It's just forum.flexrentalsolutions.com. Ask some questions there. Lots of great users on the forum that are giving some advice and helping you out. If you have some more technical issues, then you can email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.